What if a new type of thinking is what's needed now? Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for leaders and people curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. I'm your host, Susan Ní Chríodáin, and I help people in leadership make sense of themselves and their work life, especially in times of uncertainty, transition and difficulty. I'm also the author of the award-winning book, Leading Beyond the Numbers. And I love real conversations, the ones that invite you to truly listen, that create space for reflection, to be heard and to feel understood. Together with leaders and fellow explorers, we shine a light on what shapes our work lives, both from the outside and the inside. Join us for stories, insights and perspectives that keep humanity at the heart of work. Well, today I am honestly delighted to welcome Marsha Ramroop to Life Beyond the Numbers. Marsha, you're so welcome.
I can't tell you how welcome I feel. Really utterly delighted because you and I hit it off at the Business Book Awards shortlisting, and this is a great opportunity for us to actually have a proper conversation because I'm not really sure we have. So this is going to be quite an interesting episode, I think.
Well, I'm struck by so many things, and yeah, like you said, we bumped into one another at the Business Book Awards shortlisting in London in April, I think it was. And
God, was it that long ago?
And both of us have had our books highly commended in our
respective
categories.
For us!
Yay for us! If we don't celebrate, who will?
Exactly.
And lots of pings happened, I think, around our conversations and everything. And who knows what will emerge today? Because like you said, we haven't actually really had a conversation. It was parts of bits here and there. But I think one of the things that struck me most after we met and I looked at you and your website and what is written about you, let's say, was unheard voices. And in my own work, a lot of what I think about and work on with others is what's left unsaid. And it's different to unheard and unheard voices. So I'd love for you to talk to unheard voices, Marsha.
Oh, you know what? It's one of my favourite subjects, really, in many ways. So my consultancy is called Unheard Voice. And the reason for that is I used to be in broadcasting. I had always wanted to work in radio since sort of age 13 or whatever. Eventually found myself at the BBC. And one of the first big jobs that I was doing after sort of just working in newsrooms all over the place, I found myself with the role of a communities journalist. So this is like more than 20 years ago, going into communities and fundamentally asking them, what are their stories? How do they want them told? How can I facilitate the telling of those stories? And so I used to go into these communities and literally in those days, it was take MP3 players and little video recorders and literally support them to record their own story and then sit with them and talk about, okay, we can edit it in this way. So they had full ownership of those stories, which then lived on the BBC, on air and on the website and so on. And I really understood that this is how actually we should go about our news gathering. It's not that difficult. We're supposed to be serving this audience, so let's go out and talk to them and find out what those stories and what those perspectives are. And as I started to climb that slippery pole that is up to leadership, I found myself having difficult conversations because I was saying, well, hang on a second, why are we deciding here in this newsroom with this very sort of small elite group of people what the news agenda should be? Surely we should be going out. And I was in a conversation. I'd gone for this quite sort of large job, an editor or deputy editor of a station, and I'd not got it. And I was I'd impressed the panel. And one of the panelists said, oh, look, let's go for a coffee. So we ended up at the BBC Midlands mailbox in Birmingham. And we were having this coffee and we were having this discussion. I was saying, look, surely we should be going out doing things in this different way. And it was just like he wasn't kind of getting it, which I found quite frustrating. And I blurted out, we need to give the unheard voice a place to speak. And he said, that's a great line. I said, it's not a line, it's what I believe. And having articulated it in that way and never having done so before, I just realized in that moment, that's my purpose. That's what I'm here to do as a journalist and as someone who had aspirations to run radio stations and went on to do so. However, like I say, going into those upper echelons of the rarefied of leadership and so on, it became, if dare I say, more difficult to breathe. And fundamentally being able to give the unheard voice a place to speak was something that I was vilified for, essentially. And so I decided to step away from that and with the support of others started Unheard Voice, knowing that was exactly what the organization, the company needs to be called, and with the motto, giving the unheard voice a place to speak as its mission and my service to it, the purpose. So then I went into strategic inclusion. This answer could go on for another 45 minutes, but essentially that is what I'm here to do. And when you start to realize, a lot of people say, well, how do you go from journalism into full-time inclusion? Well, when I say it's my purpose to give the unheard voice a place to speak, it makes full sense. So, and it's not just about how do we, as I suppose in a broadcasting sense, how do we reach our audiences and our content, but it's also about how do we bring those people to come and work with us and how do we keep them with us, recognizing that culture is something that we need to do that. And the way that I do all of that is through a framework called cultural intelligence, which I'll happily tell you about as well.
And we'll come to that in a little bit because I want to reflect perhaps on what you've said. First of all, the the way you deliver that, the certainty that you show, or the sound, what I heard, the certainty of that is my purpose. That is what I am here to do. There's something very reaffirming and reassuring about that. And I would imagine walking into any room that people remember how you make them feel. And I would imagine people feel that, Marsha. So that's incredibly powerful already. And you were an unheard voice because they heard you. Well, they listened, but they didn't really hear what you were saying. And I love that that didn't stop you. And yet it's not like you're angry about it. It's like, oh, come on, this is it. And one of the things I think about myself is not, and maybe it's one of the reasons that I continue this podcast, certainly not that I didn't start it for that, is there is extraordinary in the ordinary. Every single person has an extraordinary story, and we don't hear them, and they don't hear them. So I just want to put that out there.
Well, thank you, Susan. I mean, one of the things is I said that I'd always wanted to work in radio, and and when I did leave, there was some bitterness. I won't lie. There was some bitterness there that I felt that I had to leave behind this career because I wasn't being heard in the organisation that I was in. But yeah, no, I fully agree with you. Everyone has a story to tell, and indeed, I know that I've been on quite a journey, which can, in some ways, make it seem extraordinary. But I guess no one really wants to truly reflect on how extraordinary something might be. But thank you for saying that.
I think it's the word, isn't it, Marcia? It's like everyone has it. So, it's common then.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
It's that we want to revere or celebrate the people who are, we somehow, the elites you talked about, whereas there's so many stories and common sense and wisdom that everyone carries. And it's amazing to give that voice.
yeah. I absolutely think that everyone's story, like I say, is but you make a point actually in leading beyond numbers about how everyone's unique, and we are each of us unique, and it's something that I very much agree with. And I tell a story at the beginning of Building Inclusion, my book about inclusion in architecture and the built environment, about how that's kind of one of the reasons why I see what I do as being not about identities, but about behaviors, because we are each of us unique. I mean, one of the key things I say is inclusion isn't about other people and their identities, about us and our behaviors. And so when we look at that introspective piece, then we start to be included, because we're all made of multiple layers, and there are, literally what, 8 billion identities on this earth. So yeah, everyone has a story, everyone has an identity, everyone is unique, and everyone has the right to feel that they are extraordinary and have a story to tell that is worth sharing, and that we should be listening to and hearing.
Absolutely. And I would say that there's probably way more than 8 billion identities because we each have several
Yeah, true.
identities.
That's yeah, you're quite right.
There's 8 billion unique individuals, extraordinary individuals with multiple identities. And that's fascinating as well because what you said there about behavior versus identity, could you maybe talk a little bit more to that, Marsha? Because I think that's quite a key point here.
Yeah, so a lot of people have heard the term EDI or DEI, diversity, equity, diversity, inclusion, whichever way you want to phrase the acronym. And it's been bandied around a lot, especially post George Floyd. I suppose in the vacuum that was COVID, people were talking about things that they weren't before. And in addition to that, it's receiving a bit of a bashing these days from certain political powers. And we have to sort of recognize that these things are perhaps not as understood as they should be. So this is the field essentially that I work in. And when we're talking about inclusion, a lot of people misunderstand what it is that this work is about. I find and I hear the words diversity and inclusion used interchangeably, and that is actually incorrect. So, if I may just take a moment to do some defining, that diversity is simply the mix of visible and invisible differences, a fact of humanity. Every single person is a part of diversity. So you can't really say, well, that person is diverse. That doesn't really make much sense. We're all part of it. A lot of the time when we're talking about diversity, what we mean is we need to address areas of underrepresentation where certain demographic characteristics aren't present where they should be. So, for example, you think in a workplace where in the global population, approximately 51% of the global population are women, then surely in organizations 51% should be women, and all the way up to the top to leadership, and we know that that isn't the case. So that's just a plain statistical example of underrepresentation. But when we talk about diversity, some people think it's about underrepresentation. It's an element of it, but diversity is recognizing that we need to have a mix of people, and underrepresentation is specifying where that mix is lacking. Underrepresentation is a symptom. So what is it a symptom of? It's a symptom of a lack of an inclusive culture where policies, procedures, and practices and behaviours don't come together for people to feel accepted, respected, and valued, for example, in a workplace. So inclusion is an act where people feel that they're valued, respected, and accepted. So if diversity is the fact of visible and invisible difference, inclusion is the act. And then you talk about the E, which is equality or equity. And the difference between them is, well, equality is about everybody getting the same, which is fine if we're all at the same start point. But we know from historic imbalance and due to individual need that there are reasons for needing to have less or more in certain circumstances. And so equity is about adjusting for that. And equity is the impact when you have diversity and an inclusive culture, then you get equitable impact. And then this is when I tend to talk about, well, how do you unpack that? That's with a framework like cultural intelligence. So when it comes to what this work is actually about, it's got to focus there on the act. What's the action? And that's the inclusion piece. And this is where I tend to say, well, inclusion isn't about other people and their identities. It's about us and our behaviors. What is it that I needed to do? What is it that our leadership needs to do? What is it that our organization needs to do so we could be more inclusive of you, whoever you are, because to that point just made, we're all made up of multiple identities. And really importantly, it's inclusion for all, or it's not inclusion at all. There are no demographics that are outside the idea of inclusion. And what a lot of the backlash that exists right now in the political narratives, this is because it's been misunderstood, or the work has been misdirected, or basically there are people out there doing stuff and they don't really know what they're doing. They're not experts. They might have some living experience of discrimination, but that never made them an expert to lead this work, unfortunately. And we had a lot of that going on. There wasn't any regulation around the profession. And so there's some real cause. And I think us as a profession, those of us, we needed to speak up more about people going into roles and not having the right expertise to be delivering systemic, strategic work, rather than, yeah, we need to have event days and flag waving and, I don't know, celebration, which is all important. But what actually changes for those who are underrepresented? And so the work that needs to be done is about behaviours and culture, which is introspective and based on inclusion.
And I mean, there's a lot
Yeah.
in that.
I know, all
I feel
right.
like I've had a master class and I might fail the exam.
It's okay. You can listen back later.
Okay, great.
And the exam will be next week.
And I have a transcript. So I suppose what I was thinking as you were speaking is the backlash. In some respects, is there, and this is pure conjecture, but is there a feeling of exclusion? Because let's just say men, white men, if you want, white men at a certain age, even make it more that they feel somehow that the world is against them and knocking them down because they haven't taken time to read your book or to understand what this is about. And they feel excluded and therefore they want to tear the house down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they are feeling excluded. However, one can't sort of separate out the fact that there needs to be that introspective piece of work, which is uncomfortable. You know, if any one of us sits down and we have a mirror held up to us, to people like us, to our behaviors, that is a place where a lot of us don't really like going. And that is the human condition. But the fact is, if we're going to learn and grow and be better for each other as humans, we have to do that. And when we do that, we recognize that colonialism, sort of history doesn't work for talking about equity and inclusive behaviors, culture, setting up the right kinds of systems. That has come from the white global man of the North. And that is a fact. And with, for example, I use a statistic, a specific statistic. In the UK, the percentage of white able-bodied heterosexual men based in the southeast of England only make up 3.1% of the population. So the white able-bodied heterosexual man based in London southeast makes up only 3.1% of the population. And yet, if you look at who leads our politics, our economics, our technology, our institutions, our systems, overwhelmingly, we have this massive overrepresentation. So they might feel excluded from the inclusion conversation. However, what they need to realize is through that introspection, what needs to change are our systems so that we have equitable outcomes. And surely it's not equitable outcomes that got them to where they are. There's a myth about meritocracy. And so when actually people who are the right qualifications, who do have the capability and ability, are coming from underrepresented groups and surpassing them, there's a quote again, it's from Paulo Freire and Adam Rutherford: when all you have ever known is privilege, equality feels like oppression. And so actually, this isn't about being excluded from the conversation. This is about them feeling oppressed and threatened by it. And so fundamentally, that is a different piece of work about how they then need to be motivated to lean into that discomfort, to learn and grow and not take it personally. This isn't about you, Mr. Smith. This is about a system that means people like you have benefited. And therefore, if you're honest, how can those systems be changed to get different results?
3%.
Actually, when I did a reassess, I think it's 2.7, but that 3.1% is from Marcus Ryder and Lenny Henry's manifesto for TV and beyond. I've got it here somewhere. Yeah.
But what's interesting is like
And they
that,
got, by the way, just to say, that's from the Office of National Statistics in the
yeah.
UK. They didn't make that up.
And that is 3 in every 100 people, because I know number statistics don't always help, but like 3 in 100 people. So if you have an organization of 100 people, then 3 in the southeast, say 3 of them are white male, privileged white male, if you
White,
like.
able-bodied, heterosexual, able to the
Okay,
person.
yeah. And not neurodiverse or anything like that either, probably. So the ideal person. And they're probably all in leadership positions as well. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's kind of like, I think about all these stories that we carry, myths and legends, and they never die, whether they're true or not. It's kind of somehow like that. Because there's so much talking about, I don't know, where does the conversation need to go, Marsha? Maybe that's the question.
Yes, and I think this is where we need to flip from talking about identities to talking about
Yeah.
behaviors.
Okay.
We need
Yes.
to flip, because this is where we've fallen down this rabbit hole of, we need to do this about race, we need to do that about gender, we need to do that about disability, we need to do that about trans lives, when actually what we need to do is saying, what is it that I need to do? What is it our organization needs to do? What are our policies, procedures, and practices need to be? And how do we make sure that we enforce them? Because the existence of policies, procedures, and practices don't guarantee their use. It's the behavior and discipline to do so, which does. How do we do those things to ensure that whoever you are, you're getting a fair crack of the whip at every stage, whether it's coming into the organization, being treated and respected to progress if you want to up the ladder, making sure those procedures are clear and bias is mitigated. All of that conversation is where we need to be looking. And this is about team effectiveness. This is about ethical governance. This is about better business outcomes. So why wouldn't we? What are the reasons for not doing this? And to your point, because you say it in Leading by Numbers as well, where's the business case for sticking with the status quo? There isn't one. No one has yet shown you or me that business case. But there are plenty of options out there to say, well, actually, if you do it in this different way, you're going to get a different result. I like to quote Einstein. I don't know if you've got any Einstein in here. I've not got past chapter 1 yet. But, the quote attributed to him is, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But he didn't actually say that. It's thought, his actual quote was, problems can't be solved with the same level of consciousness that delivered them in the first place. And he didn't say that either. But it is more useful, that quote, problems can't be solved with the same level of consciousness that created them in the first place. And when you start to think about them and thinking about the kind of solutions that are coming out, are they coming from the same perspective? What he actually said was, a new type of thinking is essential if humankind is to survive and reach higher levels. A new type of thinking is essential if humankind is to survive and reach higher levels. And the context in which he was saying this was in 1945. He had been part of the group that created the atomic bomb. And he was quite aware of his own culpability, but also humanity's propensity to want to destroy itself. And he wanted to create a sort of think tank where we fundamentally grapple with this need to make sure that we constantly rethink so that we can get to better outcomes. And he was asking for some money to set up this think tank. And the outcome of that was the creation of the Doomsday Clock. I don't know if you're aware of the Doomsday Clock, but on the 25th of January every year, this think tank is, I think, is called the Group of Atomic Scientists, something like that. They say that if we perceive that midnight is humans' self-destruction, how far away from midnight is humanity from its own destruction? And so on the 25th of January every year, they talk conceptually about how close or how far we are away from our own destruction. And the furthest away we've ever been was in sort of the early 90s, where the Berlin Wall had come down. There were peace talks in the Middle East. We were talking about climate change. And I think we were at that stage about 11 minutes away from midnight. Today, in 2025, we are 89 seconds away from midnight. And this is because of Ukraine, Russia war. A conflict in the Middle East has never been worse. We're rowing back on climate change. We're rowing back on treating each other well. We're rowing back on biodiversity loss is the worst it's ever been. And so fundamentally, a new type of thinking is required. So we need to fundamentally, when we're looking at how do we treat each other, even as something as basic as the workplace, well, it's not basic, is it? It's like where we spend, half of our waking life. We need a new type of thinking. We need to stop doing things in the way we always have done. We have to eschew this idea. Yes, we all have identities and they're important, and there are reasons why those identities are discriminated against and they're historic, and we need to grapple with these things, but not through looking at the identities themselves, but by the systems that create these outcomes. And when we start to look at it in that way and use frameworks like cultural intelligence, then we have a chance of being able to deal with it.
Whoa. And here was I thinking this was going to be a cheery, upbeat conversation, and here we are in doomsday territory. And I felt like my whole body respond to that. 89 seconds. I mean, more than 89 seconds has passed since you said it. And
Yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
you,
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's just there was a point I was making about peace the other day, which is that there are more of us. There are more of us who want to live peaceful, safe, productive lives, and there are who want to divide us. But where do we hold the power? Where do we give our power? And I think there's probably something there. And this is again where cultural intelligence can come in, because we fundamentally need some frameworks, because none of these things are innate. I think we take for granted our ability to relate to another human is somehow should be innate, but apart from maybe being a parent, I don't know that some of these things are innate to us. I think we need to learn how to do it.
and I've lost my train of thought there, so it's like I got sucked into your one again. But what was I going to say? Oh, it's gone. So
That's
that's
okay. No, well,
okay.
we were talking about Einstein, the doomsday clock, the fact that we are so close to our own self-destruction. And so
Oh, behavior.
fundamental,
I know
yeah.
where I was going. Behavior and people. It's about personal responsibility as well, Marsha, I think. And like you've just said, that it's not focusing on our identities as such, but how do I show up in the workplace, give my best along with everyone I'm with to do the best that we can, which I think would have a massive impact alone on the planet. Because if we're happier at work, we'll be happier at home, in our communities. We'll spend more money. There'll be just this rippling effect. It will bring more peace because so much of what we grapple with is maybe intertwining those. We blame the individual, their identity almost, instead of their behavior. or ourselves as well. We excuse ourselves and our bad behaviors when really it's about looking at the mirror, like you said, which may or may not be very comfortable, but is necessary. I felt like I had to get that out. So if it's not if, because it is about behavior and because a new kind of thinking is required, it's not like we can press a reset button. How do we start the small ripples, or are they already there? So then how do we catalyze that further so it spreads? Everyone has the power. Everyone has the ability. Maybe they have to wake that up, and that's the unheard voice part. So, if you had the world listening to you now, what would you tell them?
I'd say you need to develop a sense of self-awareness in the first instance. So there are a couple of things. The first is developing one's own emotional intelligence as well as cultural intelligence. And I know that you articulate quite a lot around this in Leading Beyond the Numbers. And I think that being able to do that introspective piece of work is not actually always easy when we, for example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's some of us are really struggling. We're really struggling, and are we really going to do which is the top part of that, which is your self-actualization, when you can't heat your home and you can't feed your family? And so, actually, where the responsibility lies, yes, we all have a responsibility towards each other. But we must look to our organisational leadership and our political leadership to develop their emotional and cultural intelligence. And if I might take this moment now to talk about cultural intelligence, I know that people are aware of IQ and the sort of measurement of intelligence, and then EQ, which is the measurement of emotional intelligence, which looks at how you can work with others and your own self-awareness and etc. CQ, cultural intelligence, Q stands for quotient because it's also a measure as well as an improvable skill. The actual definition of it is the capability to work and relate effectively across difference. So it's a capability, it's something you can learn, it's something you can be taught, it's something that can be improved, but it's about working, it's about functioning, it's about tasks, it's about doing, but it's also about relating, relationships, being, and behaviors. And it's about effectiveness. So are you going to be successful in whatever it is that you seek to do? And it's across difference. So recognizing that difference is all those areas of diversity that I mentioned earlier, but it's like, well, how does your consultancy work with a client? Those are different cultures that need to be understood and navigated. How does leadership work with frontline staff? Different things that need to be understood and navigated. How does HR work with finance? Different cultures that need to be understood and navigated. And so we need to fundamentally understand that when we're thinking about cultural difference, pretty much, to be human is to be cultural, and to recognize that. And so cultural intelligence it's academically robust, peer-reviewed behavioural framework, been around for a couple of decades. The research has been done across 170 countries around the world. The assessment's been taken by more than 300,000 people across the world. And the fundamental research question is, what's the difference between those that succeed in today's multicultural, globalized world and those that fail? So what's the difference between success and failure when you want to work and relate effectively across difference? Well, you need 4 capabilities. And the first is something we've already discussed, your drive, your motivation. Do you actually want to work and relate effectively across difference? And most people say, yeah, of course we do. We want to behave inclusively. But to that point that we've already made, if you're uncomfortable, if you're defensive, if you're fearful, if you're tired, if you're hungry, if you're under pressure, you're going to default to your biased behaviors. And so knowing how to motivate yourself is the key first capability. The second is knowledge. What do you need to know about living experiences that are very different from your own, even alien, where you think you're right and they're wrong because it's so different to your own? And for me, it's this is that all those differences that I just mentioned is part of it. It's those value systems and belief systems that are very different. It's different backgrounds. But when we narrow it down, that's not very helpful because to that point that we've already made, we're all made up of all these different. So that's why you need to lean into your motivation to listen to those voices that are very different from your own and start to gather that knowledge in meaningful ways. But the third capability is the most important, because if you're motivated and you have some knowledge and you go straight into action without stopping, you need to think about what you're thinking about, check your assumptions, be hugely self-aware, create procedural changes to mitigate bias. Unless we're doing those things, we will act stereotypically, tokenistically, and so strategy is the third piece and the most important. And the fourth capability, action. Ultimately, people judge us on our behaviours. And if we have a broad repertoire of individual and organisational behaviours, adaptable ones, then we are going to be more successful at being effective at working, relating across that difference. And when you have these four capabilities, drive, knowledge, strategy, and action, when you work on them, develop them, and certainly when it comes to organisational behaviour and political behaviour, when we can use cultural intelligence in these arenas in meaningful ways, it's been proven that you're going to behave more inclusively. And therefore, we need our leaders to be able to do this, because whilst it is everyone's personal responsibility to treat others with kindness, in the words of Harry Styles, that we have responsibilities amongst our institutions, systems, and organisations to create the change that makes it easiest for us to do so.
So I'm listening to this and I am slightly frightened by all that sounds like has to be done. Not me, I'm a listener. I'm saying I am still a little bit frightened myself, but where do I start? And I know you said self awareness, but even what is self awareness? What does it mean to be self aware, Marsha?
Yeah, and I think it's as with any of these things, whether it's emotional intelligence and looking at your self-awareness, or cultural intelligence, looking at your ability to relate with others, fundamentally, both of these things are journeys that we need to go. And so what is the first step? And there are many first steps that we can take. But if first we're looking at something like cultural intelligence, I would ask any individual to ask themselves, who are their friends? Who do you listen to? Who do you seek challenge from and invite challenge from? Do you listen to the voices of those who fundamentally have different opinions from you, and then also invite the opportunity to understand why they have that different perspective? I like to quote, I know I've already thrown out a billion quotes already today, but I like to quote Dale Carnegie and his 1936 tome, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And because it was written in 1936, it's very gendered in its language, and his frame of reference is Al Capone. And he says, imagine if you were Al Capone, if you were born in the same circumstances and had the same upbringing and the same background, the same experiences, you would also behave like Al Capone. He says the only reason that you're not a rattlesnake is because your parents were not rattlesnakes. And he said, when you come across people who are intransigent, when they're bigoted, think to yourself, be patient, try to understand why they have the perspective that they do. You don't have to agree with them. This is inclusion. That's one point I do like to make. That inclusion is not about agreement. It's about acceptance of difference. But it's also about recognizing that actually you've had the benefit of your education experience and, of course, listening to this podcast, which you previously may not have had. And so fundamentally, people are the way they are because they are.
And I think it's a point back to Einstein and new thinking, because with new thinking, they can change that future as well. Now, Marsha, I'm conscious of the fact that we are running out of time almost. Not quite, but I don't want to neglect your book.
Oh,
It says,
yes.
yes, you've even forgotten.
But
I have a
my
book.
book,
You can quote
Building
yourself.
Inclusion, it won an award, the other day. Highly commended at the Business Book Awards 2025.
Well, congratulations. It's
Thank
well
you.
done. So, what I'm most curious about is what is a built environment versus a natural environment?
That's a really good question. And I tend to say that a built environment is anywhere where humans have made their mark. And some people might challenge that and say, well, they're huts in the middle of the rural space. And yes, but that's been built. And so it's not nature just taking its course, for example. For me, the reason why I have done the work that I have, specifically in the built environment, when I left the BBC and I sort of catapulted myself out into the big bad world on my own, it's very scary. And my consultancy was going well, but I saw the job to become Director of Inclusion at the Royal Institute of British Architects. And so when I saw that role, it wasn't so much that I needed it, but it's that I wanted it, because I felt that if I could influence the creation of inclusive spaces, that I could influence the creation of inclusive world, because the spaces that we inhabit as humans influence how we behave with each other, how we communicate, how we act. And so that was why I went in. I told them about cultural intelligence, and they agreed. For various reasons that will remain off this podcast, I resigned that role after 18 months, but I remained in the sector to continue with that mission, because fundamentally I believe if we're not consciously building inclusion into our world, we're unconsciously building in exclusion. And so being able to bring something like cultural intelligence to the built environment, I really hope will benefit all of humanity, which is a very big thing to sort of say here with great confidence, that I'm going to change the world, don't you know? But the reason why I brought the book into the world was because there is an absence, there is a vacuum of expertise around inclusion strategy for that sector. And so Building Inclusion is actually the first book of its kind. It's a practical guide to EDI for architecture in the built environment, based on fundamentally delivering cultural intelligence across how we attract a variety of people into the sector, how we treat, progress and retain them, how we create, design and deliver products and services, and then engage with our external stakeholders, users, customers and clients. It talks about case studies. It has testimonials of people with living experience of discrimination, and it takes people on a journey to understand what they need to do, how they can do it, and what those outcomes should look like.
And I haven't read it yet. I intend on reading it. And I suppose as I'm listening to what you're saying there and what we've talked about, it comes back to people, right, Marsha? And what you learn by having a conversation or a chat with someone that you've never met before. And that is what is so striking about our first meeting for me. Because we uncovered these bizarre connections that
Yeah.
my sister didn't even believe me when I told her. So Marsha and I met at an event. And what was the first connection we made, Marsha? Can you
Was it
remember?
Dingle?
Yes.
So I don't even remember how we got there, to be
I think it
honest.
was my surname on the book, and you asked me what part of Ireland I was from.
Yes. That
And
would have that would have done it. So my daughter went to school in Dingle briefly, because I'm married to an Irishman and a rebel from County Cork. We love Kerry, by the way, just to say. Well, we love Kerry, sort of love-hate relationship with Cork and Kerry, as you know. But it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I've been with my husband now for about 22 years, and so going out there, and we were going to move. So just when Brexit was happening, we were going to move, but then COVID happened and that kind of. But my elder daughter was there in Dingle, and so yeah. And then I don't know, I was showing you in my book the notes that I have, the dedication in Irish to my children, and the note at the back for my husband in Irish as well. And one of the reasons why I did that actually was part of the decolonializing, a personal bit of decolonializing, because actually the reason why I speak English, and I haven't made it clear because people listening won't know, I'm a brown woman. My parents are from Trinidad in the West Indies, and that's sort of the history of slavery and indentured laboring means that I don't have my own language. And so, yeah, recognizing one's own language and the way that Irish has been oppressed, that was all of that kind of went through my mind when I put it in. But yeah, that was the first thing. Kerry, Dingle, Murphy's ice cream, etc. And then we started to work. We both were in Australia at the same time.
Yes. So then there was a conversation with a group of people, and there was an Australian guy there. And we talked about how we'd both lived in Australia. And I said I'd lived there 2000, 2002. I think you were there at the end of the last century. And I said to the guy, I worked for MBF, Medical Benefits Fund. And Marsha goes, so did I. I mean, what were the odds of that? And it's such a testament to speaking to strangers, you to diversity and inclusion, to everything, that you don't know who you're standing beside. And when you judge a book by the cover, you miss the contents.
Yeah, absolutely. It was that proper jaw-dropping moment, because who have I ever met that also worked for MBF in 2000? Like, it's just, yeah, we might have even, no, I don't know. Were you selling the health insurance
No, I
as
was
well?
working in the finance
Oh, you were in
department.
finance. Yeah, no, so I was in sales, but certainly that was just crazy. Crazy. We could have even been in the same building at the same time 25 years ago.
And we have only got started. So I'm sure there are other things that we that overlap. And I think there is always more that we share in our common humanity than divides us. And that is certainly what this episode has been about for me, Marsha. And we are out of time. I'm definitely going to have you back, because I don't think we talked about half the things that we were going to. So before we go, how does someone who wants to know more about you and your book get there?
Well, I'm on social media, so I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram with @Marsha Ramroop. You can check out www.unheardvoice.co.uk and the book on www.buildinginclusion.info. And you can find out more about me, cultural intelligence, and building inclusion using those routes.
Amazing. And please keep continuing to surface those unheard voices of the world, and amazing work that you're doing, Marsha. Thank you so much for such a lively and gloomy conversation.
Just like the Irish weather.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to get, but it will always rain. Thank you.
Thank you.
What stays with me from this conversation is what Marsha said, that inclusion isn't about other people and their identities. It's about us and our behaviours. And of course, this idea of a new type of thinking, not just thinking for its own sake, but thinking that changes how we act, thinking that changes the focus from identity to behaviour. What new type of thinking or behaving is being asked of me? Perhaps curiosity to listen beyond what we already know, to listen for the voices we've never heard, the unheard voice, or never invited. And courage to hold up the mirror to ourselves as we look at our own patterns, even the familiar or comfortable ones. And then the possibilities that emerge when we choose to behave with greater awareness, greater intention, and greater humanity. So, if you take one thing with you today, perhaps it could be this question that Marsha asked. What is it that I need to do? Because change starts with you. Thank you for listening to Life Beyond the Numbers. If someone popped into your mind while you were listening, maybe a friend or a colleague, send them the episode. Chances are they'll appreciate it too. And if it spoke to you, a few kind words in a review can help others like us find it too.